Welcome to the Plagues Project.
And Plagues, many angles.
Now more than ever.
Come learn with us.
Something did point out the relevance of things to me and how it affects the way we read the Torah. And this comes from one of my PhD students, a current PhD student, a brilliant student. Her name is Samaria Devine. She wrote a paper for one of our seminars on Psalm 137. Psalm 137, is the famous, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and we wept when we remembered Zion. And part of the Psalm 137 is these Jews in Babylonian exile. They say, our captors demanded of us a song. Sing us one of your songs of Zion. Then they say, how can we sing a song of Yahweh on foreign soil? Right? This is the first time the Jews had to address the problem of, is God still there in other countries too for us? So it's a terribly important psalm. It's one of the most famous. It's been made into popular songs. It's made into a reggae song that was in the film The Harder They Come. And what she wrote in her paper was, she took a current movie to shed light on it. And it's a movie that may be known to some of you. It's called The Five Heartbeats. And it's about an African-American singing group, five guys, who become pretty famous and have a career in that business. And in the early days of it, when they're driving along in their van that says, the Five Heartbeats on tour on the side of the van, suddenly they see flashing lights behind them. And there's two police cars out behind them pulling them over. They're five black guys being pulled over by two cars full of white police, and they're obviously nervous about this situation. And the police are talking to them, and they say, no, we're a singing group. And the police say, okay, sing something. So they have to perform to show that, their story is true, that's who they are. And the thing is that's, it's degrading to have to do that, to have to sing for your oppressors to satisfy them and that they'll let you go. And she used that to show something about Psalm 137. I was in Comp Lit for about 30 years, and always taught the students, when you do comp, whether it's Comp Lit or Comp History or Comp anything, you don't just say, well, we're comparing X and Y, and X is like this, and Y is like this. X has this in common with Y, and on the other hand, X is different in this way from Y. That's not interesting. It can't be just comparing, saying, oh, this is this and that is that. But you have to get some lesson out of it, draw some insight, get something out of it. And here she took this scene from the Five Heartbeats, and she applied it to Psalm 137, that if you've seen the film already, you get a sense of how it feels for that, which you don't get automatically just reading the Psalm. That here are people living in exile in Babylon. They're a minority. They're probably not the most popular people in Babylon. And Babylonians are saying to them, come on, sing us some of those old Israel songs you guys do so well, And so that you can at least start to feel it's a poem. And the idea is that you feel the pain of the people who have to undergo this. And she showed how the film could shed that kind of light on the psalm. It's not just that they have two parallel things, it's that it can make you have a better sense of what's going on in the psalm. Even if you don't have equality in a culture, you're the oppressed ones, you can achieve some kind of success by entertaining the dominant culture. I remember an African-American colleague of mine told me like 40 years ago when we were young professors starting out that he said basically the only way really for Blacks of any number to make it in the United States, he said, was either in entertainment or sports. because they'll still always let you sing for them or play football for them. And I don't usually get into these contemporary issues of race or politics, but it just happens to fit when we're reading a story about Egyptians oppressing Israelites, you know. And it is a striking fact, though, and it came to me all because Samaria had this idea that watching a particular situation of that sort in a film today could give you a real deeper appreciation, not better understanding, better appreciation of what was being said in the psalm that was written 2,500 years earlier. So there you go. And so that made me think of how our experience now of the pandemic, a plague, can impact our reading of the plague's account in Exodus. We get it, or we should. We can stop and think now, more right now, this year especially, let alone when Passover time comes rolling around, that what it meant to be an Egyptian and wake up one morning and turn on the water and it's all blood. I guess they didn't turn on the water much in those days. They went down to the river and got the water, but it had this funny red color. And after it finally goes away, you find you get into bed and there's 100 frogs in your bed with you, you know, and they're all over the place. And after that, there's an insect swarm. And after that, there's an epidemic. I mean, what we usually really mean by a plague, there's a disease going around. And then, you know, if you go to Passover Seder, you know, you take a little wine out of your cup for each of the 10 plagues, and there's 10 of them. And there's hail, and there's locusts, and there's darkness, and then finally death. And it's horrible, and this nightmare doesn't go away until you reach the point that we saw where the Egyptians are saying to their national leader, let's give in. You got to give in. We can't win this. Now, that's about as close as I've ever come to anything political here, but as my teacher, G.E. Wright, used to say, I didn't write this book. And I do think that we are uniquely placed to appreciate this biblical situation now. Imagine waking up every day to this world of horror, and it keeps getting worse each day. And you see your family and your friends and everyone suffering and dying, and your leader can't fix it. Now, how does this story develop in the Bible? So there are 10 plagues, and you know, well, of course there's 10 because, you know, it's a decimal-based society. It's a number 10-based society. Not all societies in ancient Near East were 10. There's one that was 60. And you know, over the history of the world, there have been various cultures that have different numbers of that. But you all know that in the Bible, there's some numbers that are numbers. There's some numbers that are numbers. So the big numbers in the Bible are 7, 10, 12, and 40. And you know, there just aren't 41 of a lot of things in the Bible. And if there are 11 of anything, it's because there were 12 and one of them is something happened or something like that. But it's 7, 10, 12, and 40. And those are for reasons that we can usually tell. 7, you know, 7-day week is almost universal. Countries that don't even have contact with each other have a 7-day week. And that is generally understood to be because there are 7 visible heavenly objects that are, visible with the naked eye before the invention of the telescope. So it's the sun and the moon and Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter. The farther out planets aren't visible, and Earth doesn't count because it's there, you know, so we don't count that. So there are 7 visible heavenly bodies, and that's why we call them, you know, Sun Day, Moon Day, you know, Thor's Day, Saturn Day. They reflect the heavenly bodies. Those of you who know Spanish or French, you know, Lunes, Mardes, Lundi, Mardi, Mercredi. They even more obviously named for the sun, moon, and planets. And somebody said, what was it? I think it was a Jeopardy question. They said, what is the one planet that isn't named for a god? You know, and it's Earth is the only one that isn't named for a god. Earth or Terra, but either way. And let's get to the 10 plagues. My point just being that you know, they're 10 and you expect 10 because you know, there are certain numbers that are significant. The 10, let's see, why would 10 always be a number? I know I have the answer right on the tip of my fingers, but I can't think of it now. 12, because, you know, there's 12 cycles of the moon for every one cycle of the earth going around the sun, you know, not real hard to figure out. And we call them months. And 40, I've heard different guesses people make of why 40. I think it has to do with fertility of women. That they always refer to a generation in the Bible as 40, and that's because that's about the highest age at which anybody would have a child. And I know there are women now, I mean, I know personally women over 40 who have babies now, but I think that was probably less common then, especially since the average age in biblical time is calculated to be 40. And what brought it down, in fact, was that women's deaths were much more common because they died in childbirth. So 40 was a generation. Now, maybe that's not right, but it makes more sense than most of the other guesses I've heard as to why 40. And then you get variations like, you know, when it's decreed that the highest a person is supposed to live is 120 in Genesis, and then Moses, we talked about last time, he gets to the full thing, he gets the 120. Well, that's the 10 and the 12, you know, multiplied, so it carries through. And the 40, for that matter, it's got 3 out of 4. All right, so that's why we have these, and they say, okay, so we get it. That's why there's 10 plagues. Same reason there's 10 commandments. Okay, there's 10 plagues. There's a problem though with that. There really are 10 commandments, and there they are. But the plagues, you know, is a combined text of 2 different sources. You know, it was originally the source known as E, which in my Bible is always colored yellow pages. Those are those plagues, and the source, the plagues that were written by for the source P, which is green in my book. So in my book, you can separate them. If any of you have my the Bible with sources revealed, you can see them separated. Or if you go online to it's called the Westminster Leningrad Codex, and you can find the Bible there online with all the letters in different colors. But the curious thing is the E source has 8 plagues. So it's not 7, it's not 10, it's not 12, it's got 8 plagues. I can't help that, I didn't write this book. And the priestly source has 5. When they took the 2 and combined them the way you see them in the Bible now, with the colors in between each other and it's all mixed together, it comes out as 10 because 3 of the 5 plagues in the priestly text overlap ones that are in the E text. They both have blood, they both have frogs, they both have death of the firstborn, they have the others different. So if you look at it that way, it comes out to 10. So as far as I can tell, nobody shot for 10, but it worked out that, you know, the Lord moves in strange ways, you know? So there are these 10 plagues. And the E source has blood, frogs, insect swarm, epidemic, hail, locusts, darkness, and then death of the firstborn. The priestly source has blood, then frogs, then lice, then boils, then death of the firstborn. Now, it's not just that they have 2 different numbers of plagues that you put together, so you get a story with more plagues. It makes the story more glorious because it becomes like this big, intense series of divine interventions in the world. So you're up to 10 when you start with only 5 or 8 in each of the others. And if you look at Psalm 78, it's a psalm that also lists the plagues. And it has blood, insects, swarm, frogs, locusts, hail, epidemic, and the striking of the firstborn, which is 8. And they're almost all the same ones that are in the E source, but in a different order, plus some that are in the P source. So I don't know what the author of Psalm 78 was doing, but he's got 8 plagues. And if you look at Psalm 105, there's 7 plagues. And they're also some of the same ones that are in the E and P sources in the Torah. So there are different people in ancient Israel who had an idea about the plagues, and they clearly overlap with each other. And this E source is presumably the earliest of them. And then the others, the poetry and the priestly version, went on with that. And people tend to do that. When people talk about the COVID thing 100 years from now, they'll remember some things wrong, and they'll add some extra symptoms, or they'll add some extra stories of what happened to my aunt when she got it and what happened to them. And they'll have all kinds of things that some will be true, some will be not true, some will be mistaken, some will be intentionally changed. A few people write novels that'll work with it and create some stories. I mean, that's how these things go. But the priestly source and the E source, these 2 sources that each gave us different numbers of plagues, the main difference between them isn't just the numbers, it's that it's 2 different stories of what's going on. The E source is a story that it is a duel between Moses on the one hand and the sorcerers of Pharaoh on the other. Now, most translations say magicians, not sorcerers. I think it's sorcerers, but I admit the 2 terms overlap. As long as you understand that these are understood to be real sorcerers or magicians. These are not, my father was a stage magician. He did tricks, but then he told me how he did the tricks. And then sometimes he and I would watch television together, and we'd figure out, how they did it and stuff like that. And that's a fun thing, watching magicians and trying to figure out how they did it. Or you can prefer the other, which is just not to try to figure out how they did it, but just enjoy, the magic of it. But you know that they're not really doing magic, they're doing tricks. But the Egyptian sorcerers are not tricksters, they're not stage magicians, they are Harry Potter, okay? They're doing what you learn to do at Hogwarts. And so the priestly source makes the whole thing be a duel between Moses and what he can do, and what the Egyptian sorcerers and what they can do. So there's a progression in the plagues. So the first thing is turning a staff into a dragon. Okay, so now it's not like they make it in the movies, they say a snake. It's not a snake. It is a giant mythological monster. And they're first mentioned in the book of Genesis, in the very first chapter of the Bible, that God creates these, and then you'll have to see your different English translations. It's like these giant sea creatures of some sort. And a lot of translations make it whales. That's ridiculous. It's not whales. It's mythological creatures. They're dragons. So when Moses is at the burning bush, and God says to Moses, throw down your stick, and Moses throws the stick down and becomes a snake. And just the word nachash, that normally means a snake. But when Moses and Aaron come in front of the Pharaoh, they throw down Aaron's staff, and it doesn't become a snake, a Hebrew nachash, it becomes a tanin in Hebrew, which is the same word that was used in Genesis chapter 1 for whatever these huge primordial mythological creatures are. You got to think of how much greater that scene is. And they miss out on doing this in the movies, and it'd be so easy because now they've done Harry Potter, and they've done what's the series, Game of Thrones. They do dragons now. That's no big deal to do, and they could really make those movies, add a little extra something to them instead of just making cobras. They're not cobras, So Aaron throws his staff down, and it becomes a tanin. But then the Egyptian sorcerers come out, and they throw their staffs down, and they all become taninim too, which was probably a really bad day to be around the palace in Egypt, because now there's a whole bunch of dragons in the same room, And do they eat anybody? Do they breathe fire? It doesn't get into any specifics about them. But they're not nice, and they are big. And I have this personal guess, which I cannot prove based on anything, but remember, guess in Greek is hypothesis. So I have this personal hypothesis that every now and then in ancient times, like in present times, they'd find dinosaur bones. And when you find the dinosaur bone, you go, whoa, what animal is this? I don't know any animals this big. It must be that there used to be, in ancient times, giant animals like this, which as a matter of fact was correct. So they developed myths about ancient dragons that aren't here anymore. Why not? You don't like it? Make up your own hypothesis. So the first thing is that Moses and Aaron can turn a stick into a dragon, but these sorcerers are able to do it too. Now, I don't know how they do it. You know, from the point of view of the text, you have to understand, this is real magic. It's not that they do tricks, you know, and they pull a dragon out from behind a curtain when they do it, but Aaron really does. No, they do the same thing that Aaron does exactly. And one of my great students back when I was at the University of California, San Diego, Shona Delansky, she wrote a dissertation called Now You See It, Now You Don't, Magic in the Bible and the Ancient Near East. And then she published it as a book. You can get the book. And now she's a professor in Canada at Claremont. And what she did was ask that classic question, what's the difference between what Aaron does with his staff and what the Egyptians do with theirs? And that's a question, of course, that's been addressed many times in history. And the usual answer is, when Aaron and Moses do it, it's a miracle. When the Egyptian sorcerers do it, it's magic. And you go, wait a minute, what is the difference? They come out exactly the same, except that Aaron's dragon, you know, my dragon is bigger than your dragon. You know, his dragon, I'm not going to say my snake is bigger than your snake because I haven't gone there at all, but I guess I just did. But the dragon, but the point is they could do it. And so people always like, no, one is a miracle and one is a magic. And you go, well, what's the difference? I said, well, miracle derives from God. And you go, oh, well, who does magic derive from then? And they would, you know, get into all kinds of analyses of these. But Shauna, I think, made the best explanation of it. She said, the difference is nothing. They're the same thing. We're just using two different words, calling one a miracle and one magic. But that's what a definition of a miracle and the definition of magic, a real magic, are the same thing. It's something that doesn't go according to the rules of empirical observation and science and all, but it happens and we can't explain it. And that's a miracle and that's magic. And so it was understood by the biblical authors that magic was real and that there were people in the ancient areas who could do magic, but it's forbidden. So if you look in Deuteronomy, it has all kinds of laws, and it says you can't be a magician, you can't be a sorcerer, you can't be a medium who consults the dead, you can't examine livers, you can't, all those things that the sorcerers did, the Israelite authors believed you could do it, but it's forbidden. It's just not allowed because your only path to higher things is supposed to be through the priests and God. All right, so then Aaron takes water and pours it out and it turns to blood. So the Egyptian sorcerers pour out some water and it turns to blood. So far, nothing's going to impress this Pharaoh because his guys can do it too. And so then Aaron strikes the water with his staff and frogs start coming out all over the place. Frogs here, frogs there. So that's to say the first three things, which is the first two plagues plus the stick dragon thing, the sorcerers can do too. And then you come to the fourth one, which is they make lice come out on the Egyptians. So they're all getting lice. And it says explicitly, and the sorcerers tried, but they couldn't do it. So now Moses and Aaron can do something that the sorcerers aren't able to do. And the one after that is a big winner. It's boils. The Egyptians all start getting boils. It says, and the sorcerers get the boils too. So what you're watching is this crescendo of, you know, a duel that in the end, Moses and Aaron's magic is more powerful than the Egyptians' magic. And then finally comes the death of the firstborn. And by the time you get to that one, the sorcerers are no longer mentioned in the story. They've become irrelevant. Once they got the boils like everybody else, then who cares? You know, they're not in the picture. And one presumes that any firstborn Egyptian sorcerers must have died like firstborn Egyptian water drawers, you know. All right, so that's how those priestly plagues progress. It is a continuous story. And the funny thing is, those when they get in the Torah mixed in with the plagues of the other source, where there aren't any competitions with sorcerers, it makes the whole thing more kind of complicated. Like, you know, it's every third plague where the sorcerers can do it too, and the other two don't mention it. And it's just, I mean, it still works as a complete story. Everybody's been fine reading it for a couple thousand years, thank you. But still, it's different from the way that story would have read if you only had in the Torah the story of Moses and the sorcerers. So what's going on in the other source? In the E source, there's a progression also going on, the one that has the 8 different plagues. But in that source, what it is, it's a negotiation. It's this Pharaoh versus Moses trying to kind of, oh, let's face it, they're both doing the art of the deal. Is what they're each. I mean, they're each trying to outdo the other guy in the negotiation. It is what it is. The original negotiation is Moses goes in front of the Pharaoh first, and he says, "Thus says Yahweh, let my people go." And Pharaoh answers, "I don't know Yahweh, and I won't let your people go." Oh, that didn't work, the first gambit. So then Moses, in the next sentence, if you look, he changes, it's from the Hebrew imperative, let my people go, to the cohortative, which is like, the cohortative is like, let me entertain you, or let's get stoned. It's like that, you know? And so he makes it, instead of let my people go, it's, oh, would that we might go. And he says, and what is it we're asking for? That we might go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and hold a festival for our God. What's the big deal? Just let us get a 3-day holiday so we can go out in the wilderness and worship God. Now, you don't get to be Pharaoh by being stupid. Pharaoh, well, you get there by being the son of the preceding Pharaoh, but nonetheless, the Pharaoh was not born yesterday, and he doesn't fall for this, because what they said is, all we're asking for is a 3-day journey into the wilderness, but Moses neglects to mention anything about ever coming back after the 3 days. So Pharaoh doesn't fall for this, and he says, no, you can't go. So that's one step. That's in Exodus 5. And then there are a few plagues going back and forth with the 2 different sources. And then in Exodus 10, Moses says, okay, who's going to go? And Moses says, well, it's funny, if you see it in the movie, the 10 Commandments version, Charlton Heston's Moses says, with our wives and our cattle will we go. With our sheep and our children will we go. And I'm going like, what do you mean, will we go? You've been talking like a normal human being this whole movie. So Pharaoh says to Moses, no, just the men can go. The women and the kids can't go. Because he knows if they go just the men, well, then they're going to have to come back, right? I mean, that makes sense. So Moses rejects that, and they bring some more plagues. So then at the end of that chapter, Pharaoh calls them back again. And he says, okay, the men and the women, all the people can go, but leave the animals. You can't take your sheep or your cows or any of those with you. And you go, oh, real smart, because then they'll all starve out in the wilderness if they don't take their flocks with them. So Moses says no to that one too. So this goes back and forth. And then finally, when you get to the last plague, where you know, death of the firstborn, then Pharaoh just gives in. He says, oh, okay, everybody, all the people and all the animals, you can all go. That is to say, in the biblical story, the leader of the country gives in only when, after many attempts, he has to give in. And I'm not necessarily going anywhere with that. Okay? So then the Israelites get to go. And the question then is, now that we've tried to have a sense of how it feels for the Egyptians and for their leader, and that's what I'm after here. From now on, when you read that story, read it with that sense, the same way as I now can never read Psalm 137 again, since my student had me watch that movie. That it's real, and it's a kind of pain and fear that we all know, every single one of us watching this today, every single one of us pretty much on earth knows this now. And so you have, if you can develop a sense of that, how horrible this was for the Egyptians, what a horror it must have been for the Israelites being in the middle of it, even if the plagues weren't hitting them too. They're seeing it all around them. They're part of it, and they know it's on account of them. So everybody's experiencing this horrible thing, just like right now. I don't have COVID, I hope. To the best of my knowledge, I don't have COVID because I've been hiding in my well-appointed cell for 8 months here. But it doesn't mean that I'm untouched by what's going on in the world around me. And it must have been that way for them too. So I'm not making silly little analogies here. This is serious. This is factual analogies. And so I'm interested in, what do the Israelites do when it's over and they've won and now they can leave? So what do? Starts in Exodus 12, they've got the last plague coming and they're going, and they pass a bunch of laws. God gives them laws. And what stands out especially in Exodus 12, among the rules he gives them, the first one is this famous, that you have to treat aliens with equality. That you're just leaving after all these centuries of being aliens in Egypt, you being the ones who were oppressed. There's this law now that a Jew can never oppress an alien, by alien meaning a foreigner living in your country. So in ancient Israel, if a Frenchman was visiting, which would have been a good trick because there were no Frenchmen yet, but if a Frenchman's visiting in ancient Israel and he goes on trial for a crime, he's supposed to have all the same protections that the Israelites do. Or if he goes to court in a civil matter, and it's a lawsuit between a native-born Jew and a visiting Greek, the Greek has all the same rights in the trial that the native-born Jews had, and the judges are not permitted to discriminate against them. How often is that mentioned in the Torah? I counted 52, one for each card in the deck. There are 52 times in the Torah where it says that you have to treat, that the law is the same for aliens as it is for citizens. And that first one where it occurs right there, right after at the 10th plague, it says, Torah achat, you shall have one Torah for the citizen and for the alien. That's pretty amazing. So they took the lesson from it. And we know it's always been that way ever since. Jews are not allowed to oppress aliens. I guess I'm getting relevant there too. I don't plan these things, I just read the book and there they are. And second thing that they're told in those laws right after when they're getting out is, don't ever forget that you must always remember this. And it ends up, you have to have this holiday every year where you retell the story and teach your children. And when they ask you, you have to tell them. That's the second. The third thing is redemption of the firstborn, Pidyon Haben. The Jews have to forever after do this ceremony especially when it's a boy born. That's because we're the boys, because it's a redemption thing where you pay something to a Kohen, meaning it's expressing that you're thankful that this didn't happen to our kids, what happened to them all around us. And the fourth and last thing especially that they do is they sing. They get through the Red Sea, and the first thing the Israelites do is they sing. And I just think that's great. When I was a consultant on the movie Prince of Egypt, so I went up for the day to DreamWorks, and first I got to watch, I went in this little room where there were 3 of the biggest darn computer screens I'd ever seen in front of me on the desk. I was very impressed in those days. Today, everybody can have one in their living room, But in those days, it was big to have those 3 big screens in front of me. And I watched the movie, and it was about 40% done at that time. So part of it was still stick figures, and part of it was the regular voices. And I'm watching the whole thing. It's in English, and it's Michelle Pfeiffer and Sandra Bullock and Val Kilmer. I mean, it's a lot of famous actors doing all the voices and all, and it's in English. And then they come to the Red Sea. And they're singing, the Song of the Sea, the Song of Miriam at that point as they're at the sea. And suddenly I realized they're singing it in Hebrew. I go, wait a minute, this movie was in English. When did that start to be in Hebrew? And they had done the transition so smoothly, the segue, that I hadn't even noticed that I switched to Hebrew. And it was a very beautiful melody, and I got all choked up. So then later I went in to meet Jeffrey Katzenberg, the head of DreamWorks. And I said, I got to tell you, you don't need my praise, but I got to tell you, I was really moved, choked up by that scene. And he said, I'll take your praise, okay. And the funny thing was, I got to see it a second time. I went a year later when it was 90% done. And I went in and I'm thinking, oh darn, this time I'm not going to get all choked up and everything because now I know it's coming, So I said, I'm watching another movie, and they got to the Red Sea, and they're singing the Song of the Sea in Hebrew, and I got all choked up again. And I'm going, that son, he got me again. And that is so extraordinary that the celebration immediately is done in song. And, Jews haven't stopped doing that. That's what you do. It's hardly unique to the Jews. Other people sing songs too. That's how the thing ends, except just one last thing, that it ends near the end of the Torah. In Deuteronomy 28, it's the longest chapter in the Torah because it's the blessing and curse lists. It's blessings if you keep all the laws of the Torah, and curses if you don't. And the curses are 3 times as many as the blessings, because the stick works better than the carrot, apparently. So it's a 68-verse chapter of the Torah, and then it's just a couple chapters left and it's over. And near the end of this longest chapter that's near the end of the Torah, it ends with a warning. It's in Deuteronomy 28, verses 58 to 60, a warning to be watchful to the people. It's a couple of verses. If you won't be watchful to do the words of this Torah that are written in this scroll, to fear this honored and awesome name, Yahweh, your God, then Yahweh will make your plagues and your seeds plagues, astonishing, great, and enduring plagues, and great and enduring illnesses. And he'll bring back among you every disease of Egypt, which you were dreading, and they'll cling to you. So pretty much the worst curse is put on at the end of this curse list, which has just horrible things that will happen if you don't keep the Torah. This one that's like the second to the last one is, I'm going to bring back those plagues that we did to the Egyptians, and we're going to do them to you. So that thing about plagues never goes away. Plagues, pandemics, epidemics are always a real threat, whether it's, the Black Death or Corona or Ebola or whichever one is planned for us next. We should at least use our life experience now as my message today. I'm waxing rabbinic today. We should use this message to, when you read Torah from now on, you should read the Torah better. And when you read the Torah and realize what it's saying there, you should, live your life better. It's a symbiotic relationship between the Torah and life.